map async and bind async. Are you as excited as I am? Los geht's. Hi there, welcome back to the DevOl. I am Roman and this is the third and final episode of our small F# async series. We are going to go on exactly where we left off in the last episode, so if you haven't watched it, go there and watch it, because otherwise you miss out a lot, of course. So if you like this stuff, give me a subscribe, watch this video to the end, it helps me a lot. So we are going to build map async and bind async now, and we are going to make good use of this and putting this into our F# pipelines. So without further ado, los geht's. Alright, so we did finish the last episode with a cliffhanger, and the cliffhanger was that we do not want to call the async.run synchronously function all the time after we have some async operation in our pipeline. So the idea is to only call the function once, and we want to call it at the edge of our program. And in this case, our program is this whole pipeline. So we only want to call the async.run synchronously function once at the end of our pipeline. So how can we actually do this? Well, first of all, let's put this in the end. And of course now we have the same problem again. The top 3 doesn't expect an async as its first input parameter. It expects a post list. So what can we do? Well, we could do the same thing as we did with the posts of async user async function. We just create a new function. We create this function and call this function top3 async, of course. So we have done this, and this function doesn't take a post list, it takes an async of a post list. And again, similar to the other one, we await the result of the post, rename this here again to post async to actually see that we are working with async values here, doesn't really matter. And then we can actually await the result and put this result with a post list into the top3 one. And here we are actually using the return keyword, not the return bank keyword, because the top3 function doesn't return an async. So we need to actually wrap all this stuff within an async. And we have the same thing with the content async function in here. So it does exactly the same, takes the post async, awaits its result, and then puts this into the content function. Pretty nice. So now this is not working. Why is this not? Oh, of course, because I didn't call this content async, but comments async. But now that we have fixed this, we see here that everything compiles. And we run this. We have 2 new functions that both takes an async of post list, and we have our normal nice pipeline here, and we have actually reached our goal to run our stuff synchronously just once. So at the end of our program, we are actually running all this async stuff. But let's have a look at those 2 new async functions. They look pretty similar, right? And I think it's pretty cumbersome if we have just our normal F# functions, and whenever we want to work with those functions in an async system, we need to write new functions that just takes those values, unwrap them, wait for the results, and then feed them into our other functions. This might blow up the code a lot, because for each function we needed at least one more function that actually can work with those asynchronous values, and this is not very nice, I think. So if you have a look at those 2 functions, they pretty much do the same, right? They just have an async parameter, and then they await the result, and then they feed this result into another function. And if we have worked with F# with lists and so on, this might sound a bit familiar to you, because what we're actually doing is we are mapping the async of a post list into another function. So what we can actually do is we could create a map async posts function, and we could replace one of those functions with a map async posts function that takes 2 parameters, the posts async and some mapper that is used to feed this value into this. So, and then of course we are not returning a specific async of a string list here. So what we're doing now is that after we have weighted the posts async, we don't feed them into a specific function anymore, but we feed them into the mapper that we have given to the map async posts function. So what we can do now is to replace the contents async function with a map async posts functions, and as the first parameter we just put in the function that the unwrapped async value should receive the values from. So in our case it's the contents function, and after we have done this we can also replace the top 3 async function with this. So we have the map async posts and we put the top 3 into this, and now we can get rid of the top 3 async function, and we only have this one generic map async posts functions here that takes a mapper and takes an async of post lists, unwrap this and puts this into this mapper function. And because we use the return keyword here, the result is then wrapped with an async again. Okay, but now we get a new requirement. We get the requirement that we want these top 3 content things not to be like this, but we want them to be in uppercase to be able to market them better. So we just have a new function, right, which is a toUpper function, which takes a list of strings, and then we could actually map over them, call the toUpper function of the string object, and we call it a day. We can just put this into our pipeline, right? So we need to tell F# that this is a string list to make the compiler happy here with the toUpper method, and then we put this into our pipeline. But this of course is not working, because we can't just do this here, because our map async post function doesn't expect a string list, an async of string list, it just expects an async of post list. So what do we need to do? Write a map async string function? No, we don't need this. If we have a closer look at here, this function is already pretty generic. So what we can actually do is just call this function map async, get rid of the type in here, rename this to some generic name like value, and then we get some async in there. And then we have a generic map async function in which we can put everything that is wrapped into an async, and we can give it a mapper function. So what we actually have in here is a generic function for async that takes a mapper function from A to B. It takes an async of A and then it returns an async of B. So it's pretty much the same as the other mapper functions for lists, for sequences, etc. that take a list of some type and a mapper function and returns a list of some other type. This is the same, but in this case just for async. Nice. Okay, to wrap this up, let's have a closer look at the post of async user async function, which is kind of a mouthful, right? Let's have a look at this function. So we replaced our generic top 3 async functions, etc. with map async function. So can we do something similar with the post of async user async function? So let's have a look at it. What does it do? It takes some asynchronous value, awaits its result, and then it feeds this result into a function that is not returning a normal value, but an async value. And that's why we are using the return bang keyword here. So we can actually replace this similar to the map function. We can't use the map async function in here because the difference is that the post of user async function is actually returning an async, and the top 3 and the content functions do not do this. So what we can actually do is to replace this with another function that is called bind async. So, and this bind async function doesn't get a mapper, it gets a binder, just a name, and some random async in there. And then we have a value, and we unwrap this async with the let bang syntax here. So we get a non-async value out of this. And then we are going to feed this value into our function, into our binder function that is actually returning another async. So if we have a look at this up here, we see that we have an async of A that we put into this function, and we have a function that
takes an A, so the async needs to be unwrapped, and it returns an async of B, and the whole function then returns an async of B. And now we have a generic binder function that we can replace our user async user blah 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 function with. And so we can just put the bind async function in there and give it as the binder the posts of user async function. So what we have done now is we have replaced the needs for all those companion functions that take another async in there and replace them with two generic functions, bind async and map async, which is pretty nice. So now we have reached our goal. We can just use our normal functions within our system and call async.run synchronously in the end just once, and everything works as expected. Awesome.
Yep, that's it. We've just reached the end of this small series. Did you like it? Did you learn something new? If yes, then go on and tell everyone about it. Tell your mom, tell your uncle. If you didn't like it, then maybe just don't tell anyone. Or maybe tell me and tell me what I can do better next time. So I hope you like this stuff. You can go to my Twitter, ask me any questions there. You can ask any questions here in the comments. Contact me however you like it. I hope you like this stuff. See you soon, and bye-bye.